Hey everyone, and welcome to day 4 of 5 days, 5 VRs. And today's response is to the tag Tarot Temptations. And this is from Ben from Beneficial Tarot. I think he started this tag at the beginning of the year in January. And so I definitely missed the memo on that one because I was sick for a lot of January. That was not a good time. So here I am doing it now in May. So there are 7 prompts. Let's get started. What type of tarot system draws you in? Waite, Thoth, Tarot de Marseille. For me, the OG is RWS. It is the one that I come back to time and time again. It is the one that the majority of my tarot library is based on. I like the reading system of Tarot de Marseille. I don't so much care for the actual historical decks of that time. So I don't have a lot of Tarot de Marseille decks, but certainly decks that are maybe inspired by Marseille. But yeah, I've come to love that more pip style numerological approach to the tarot. As for the Thoth, that is a system that I am learning this year. And I can't say it's one that actually draws me in as much as I just want to be more familiar with it. I just want a more high level view, basics, the general overall scope of Thoth. I don't find that Leda Friede Harris. Lady, I blame Mercury retrograde for this. This was not a good week to be doing this. Anyway, I find the traditional Thoth imagery to not be my cup of tea. And that's okay. We'll just leave it at that. Number 2, what theme are you drawn to in decks? Earth decks, Fae decks, medieval, etc. I am mainly drawn to old world decks. So anything that feels like old school sci-fi fantasy, anything that feels like I'm going back in time or that I'm escaping this world for a different one. So that's why modern decks don't usually appeal to me, though I do have a few. But more oftentimes I am drawn to those other more fantastical themes. Just as with movies and books, for me, the visuals of tarot, it's about escape. I also love any kind of vampire themed decks. There are several out there. I don't think I have found one that really grabs me in terms of all the boxes I want to tick, but Darkwood maybe is the closest, and that's not a solely vampire themed deck. It's more of just a kind of witchy fantasy, wizardly, just all the things mixed in there. What do you like cosmetically about a deck? Cardstock and size, box, guidebook, etc. Cardstock, I like them to be thin and flexible and yet still hardy and resistant to chips. I don't really care for the shiny gilding, holographic gilding. So I've said this many times before, but a lot of people don't care for Llewellyn. And I've had this, as you can see, I've had this copy for some years. And even though it needs re-edged, this cardstock has held up very well. This hasn't chipped at all. I mean, I riffle shuffle, and I find on the whole that Llewellyn decks and this kind of cardstock is one of my favorites because it's the perfect size for my hand. I can riffle shuffle, and they're pretty resilient. So I do not, however, like the huge Llewellyn boxes. So say something like this is what I would prefer. You know, any kind of box with the thumb holes that you can take off the lid, or like the clamshell with the magnetic flap, where you have the deck and you have the guidebook that fits all in here. That to me is the perfect kind of combination. What type of deck do you prefer? Tarot, Oracle, Lenormand, Kipper. My number one preference is tarot. That is the type of deck that I have the most of. That makes up the majority of my collection. I also like Lenormand and have several of those decks. And I like Oracle as well, even though my use of Oracle is a lot less frequent, and I've become pretty selective about Oracle. One of these days, I would like to dip into reading playing cards, and yeah, I think that's it. I think I want to stop there. I don't think I need to keep adding on to that. There are enough systems for me to play around with. Number 5, do you like decks that have a story to them? A story attached to the cards or the process of how the deck was made? I certainly appreciate when a deck creator does give me some idea of the genesis behind the deck and the reasons why they were compelled to make it, you know, what inspired them, etc. As far as a story being attached to the cards, that depends. So I would say generally no. Especially with something like, you know, themed decks, like fandom themed decks. Those I've come to realize do not work for me, because if I'm familiar with the particular stories, then I get very much locked in to those stories, and in connection with the card, it may or may not work for me. And even if I do understand why that particular story is chosen for that card, that I might also find that limiting. Just in terms of how I want to interpret the message and read that card, because I'm once again too focused on my pre-existing knowledge of that story and what it means to me personally. One deck that is themed that I actually haven't had that kind of problem with is the Golden Girls Tarot. And I would say that this is probably because even though, here are the backs, even though I watched this show religiously as a kid, and I loved it so much, I was not one who went back to rewatch these episodes years later. And so, while I know the general personality types of these characters, their relationships to each other, I can recognize certain references to certain episodes. However, I am removed enough from this show that I can still read with this deck and not be too locked in by any kind of personal connection that I have to any particular episode, or any way that I particularly perceive a character. So I think that's why this is a deck that I have had no problems using. Number 6, are you tempted by seasonal decks, Halloween decks, Christmas decks, etc.? Absolutely, especially Halloween, and I mean, not specifically Christmas, but that wintry holiday time of year. And as much as I'm tempted by seasonal decks, I don't have many. Any? Well, so in terms of any decks that feel like the wintry holiday season, I don't have any that come to mind. And I know that there are decks out there like the writer Waite. There's like a Christmas looking one. I forget what it's called, but it looks cute. I thought about it, but I'm not really an RWS person, like in terms of, that pixie inspired art. I have seen Oracle decks. I've seen decks on Etsy. Nothing's really hitting the spot for me. Halloween, I did have the Halloween Oracle, pass that along. I've seen, once again, some decks come onto the market, like the Jack-o'-lantern tarot. Again, not quite hitting the mark for me. I do have the spoopy Lenormand that I made to give more of like a Halloween type of vibe. But I also feel like I could use this outside of Halloween. I don't think it's so OTT Halloween, but I did make this with that kind of theme in mind. But that's it. Like, I wish there was a Halloween tarot that really caught my eye, and one that I felt like was kind of up my alley, but not yet. Final question. Do you have a favorite artist who creates cards? I like Abigail Larson. I think she's a phenomenal artist, and I have followed her work even before she started doing tarot decks. As many of you know, I love the Darkwood Tarot. I know she's coming out with a horror tarot, but I have not pre-ordered that one. I'm still undecided about that one. I would count her as an artist that I would keep checking on to see if she's created more decks. And then the other one, I don't know if this counts, but Jasmine Beckett Griffith, she has a lot of decks, but to my understanding, it's not like these images were created to become a deck. These were all images that she had created beforehand, and then they were retroactively fit into the system of tarot or oracle. So she's not really a deck creator. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I'd count that one, but I love her. And that's a wrap for this VR. Thank you so much if you have been hanging out with me this week and watching these videos. I really appreciate it. And I know I'm behind on comments, but I will do my best to catch up. It's been a very busy and kind of discombobulated week, and I do blame Mercury retrograde. But one more video to go. So I will see you for the final day of 5 days, 5 VRs. Thanks so much and take care.